Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, is Primož Roglič the best rider in history to have never won the Tour de France? I'll be discussing that with myself based on some quotes that he gave recently. I'll also wrap up the European Cyclo-cross Championships and a few more last-minute rider transfers. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that Jonas Vingegaard is back to winning ways. He took victory at the Saitama Criterium in Japan at the weekend, despite a crash midway through the race. He got away with former teammate Primož Roglič, but dropped him with 2Ks to go in the exhibition race. The question is, who wore the hat the best? We also learnt that Tour de France stage winner Victor Lafay is not going to move to Japan to sell cheese, at least not yet. He signed a deal with Unibet Rose Rockets to continue racing next year, so his retirement plan will have to wait. Whilst double Zwift Academy finalist and hugely popular Mattia Gafuri has gotten himself a World Tour contract at last with Picnic Post NL. Love to see it. And finally, we learned that Primož Roglič is considering a tilt at a 5th Vuelta a España title next year. If he's successful there, it would take his tally to 5, putting him 1 ahead of the man he currently holds the record with, Roberto Heras. Speaking to AS at the Saitama Criterium in Japan, Roglič said that although it was the correct decision to miss the race this year, he missed competing there and would like to go back in 2026 if his team Red Bull Bora-Hansgrohe agrees to it. Now, it was a quote that made me wonder whether he's now given up on winning the Tour de France, and if that is the case, will he go down as the best rider in history who hasn't won the Tour de France? Before I get on to that second question, I think it's worth looking at the situation that Roglič now finds himself in. He is 36 years old at this point, and although he came to the sport later than most, 2026 is going to be his 11th season as a pro rider. He also finds himself in a situation where he's no longer the kingpin at his team, Red Bull Bora-Hansgrohe. Not only has Florian Lipovic, a home rider, emerged as a potential Grand Tour winner, they've also signed Remco Evenepoel and his entourage. Have they signed Evenepoel to win the Giro or the Vuelta? Almost undoubtedly not. They'll be hoping that they can help develop him into a Tour de France winner. That's obviously a big gamble in the Pogacar and Vingegaard era, but you have to try and you have to believe. So that leaves Roglič, to some degree, at the mercy of his team's focus and of his teammates' focuses. Yes, he'll still hold a decent amount of sway on what his calendar of racing looks like, but he can't demand to be sole leader at the Tour de France. And perhaps, given his recent quote about La Vuelta, he doesn't want to be either. I get the impression that Roglič is quite a pragmatic and realistic kind of guy, and he'll know better than anyone how much Pogacar has improved since 2020, where he took that Tour de France win on La Planche de Belleville time trial. And I'd imagine that Roglič no longer thinks it's possible to beat Pogacar at the Tour de France if they both go into it at 100% capacity and neither has bad luck. Personally, I think it's a real shame that Roglič hasn't won the Tour de France during his career. I'd have loved to have seen him do it. I think he really deserves it. 2020 obviously was his best opportunity, and as much as he says that he's put that defeat behind him, I do wonder whether he thinks back to it and ponders where he or his team could have done things differently. So where does that leave him? Well, still, in my opinion, as one of the best riders that the sport has ever seen. So far, Roglič has racked up 91 pro race wins, but it's the level of those wins that's astounding. Almost 3/4 of them have been at World Tour level. 23 of those 91 wins are general classifications. Along with his 4 Vuelta wins, he's won the Giro d'Italia, Paris-Nice, and then the Dauphiné, Tirreno-Adriatico, Basque Country, Catalonia and Romandy twice each. Add in the UAE Tour and that is 17 GC wins at World Tour level. How does that compare to other active riders? Well, Pogacar is the obvious place to start, isn't he? He's won 14 at this point. That said, he's been pro 3 years fewer than Roglič, and he's an alien. Chris Froome has won 12, Nairo Quintana 7, Jonas Vingegaard 6, and Egan Bernal 5. But what about Roglic's own teammates? Well, somewhat surprisingly, Remco Evenepoel has only won 3 World Tour level stage races in his career. The Vuelta a España, the UAE Tour and the Tour de Polonia, whilst Lipovic has never won a World Tour GC, not even a stage in fact. So Primož Roglič has won 3 more World Tour level stage races than Vingegaard, Bernal, Evenepoel and Lipovic combined. He's also won 7 one-day races in his career, so he's far from a one-trick pony. Back to the original question though, is he the best rider in history to have never won the Tour de France? It's always a funny one, isn't it, trying to compare different eras, but if we look at the all-time Grand Tour winners list, Roglic sits equal 9th, and there's nobody ahead of him who hasn't won the Tour de France. The only rider who's also won 5 Grand Tours without a Tour de France is Alfredo Binda, who took all of his at the Giro d'Italia about 100 years ago. Now, the rider who many tout as the best to never win the Tour is Raymond Poulidor. He became known as the eternal second, courtesy of his 3 second places in the race. He also came third 4 times, so a total of 7 times on the podium. Riding in the Merckx era wasn't very easy. Very similar, in fact, to the Pogacar era, so in some ways that gives Roglic and Poulidor something in common. However, despite his many podiums at the Tour de France, Poulidor didn't win as many races overall and didn't win as many stage races either. He did win more one-day races, but like Roglic, only one of them was a monument. So personally, I think Roglic will end his career with the better Palmarès of the two, but then comparing the two is really just opinion, isn't it? They're both amongst the best riders in the history of the sport. And of course, Roglic has not finished just yet. Whilst we don't know whether he'll continue his career beyond next year, we can be fairly sure that he'll be up there fighting for the win at the sport's most prestigious stage races next season. Roglic has won at least one World Tour level stage race every year since 2018, which is a remarkable feat. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. How does Roglic compare to the sport's other great stage race riders who haven't won the Tour de France? Or perhaps it doesn't even matter. Either way, you can let me know in the comment section down below. Okay, I will move on to Cyclocross now and the European Championships, which took place in Middelkerke in Belgium at the weekend. The men's was a really thrilling race right down to the wire. The Belgians and Dutch were amassed at the front on the opening laps, but later in the race, poor Pim Ronhaar was outnumbered by the Belgian Armada. And he fought incredibly well. At times he used attack as the best form of defence. He certainly wasn't making it easy for them, let's put it that way. Now for much of the race, he was with Naes, Visura and Verstringer, but in the closing stages they were also joined by Toon Aerts and Cameron Mason. In one of the last of the many sandy sectors, Ronhaar made a small but costly error, but at exactly the same time, Toon Aerts flew through that same sector, straight onto the wheel of Naes, and soon going past it. He led out the sprint to the line and Naes had no answer. That was Aerts' second win at the European Championships, and it came 9 years after his first. And Belgium ended up taking all 3 medals on the day, with Visura in third, whilst Ronhaar had to settle for fourth, Mason fifth. In the women's race, it was much more clear-cut. Inga van der Heijden had an incredible start. She seemed to have a pretty big gap over everybody else after about just 2 minutes of racing. And I was wondering whether she might have gone out too hard, but I was wrong in questioning her. She never looked back and never looked like being caught. That was in part though due to some good work from her Dutch teammates behind, who made Sara Casasola of Italy do most of the work in chasing. Unfortunately though for the Italian, she touched Lucinda Brandt's wheel in the closing stage of the race and crashed quite heavily. She did remount to finish fourth, but it was a real shame for her. So Brandt took the silver medal on the day and Aniek van Alphen made it all Dutch podium with the bronze medal. This is a good time to remind you, in fact, that you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus or Max. Cyclocross racing will continue tomorrow with the next round of the Super Prestige in Niel, and then again on Saturday in Merckx, and then there's more action from Hammer this coming Sunday. Okay, I'm going to finish again with more transfer news. As mentioned at the very start of the show, Victor Lafay has decided to continue his career despite previously saying that he was happy to retire from racing. The 29-year-old Frenchman is the latest big name to be signed by Unibet Rose Rocket, who look to have a very good chance of a Tour de France wildcard entry next year. I think it's fair to say that Lafay has been fairly inconsistent over his career, so it's going to be interesting to see whether this move helps him refocus or if it's the point at which he drifts into retirement relatively anonymously. I have a feeling it might be the former. I reckon that team is going to have a great motivation and atmosphere throughout next year. The other really interesting signing that I already mentioned is Mattia Gafuri, who signed for Picnic Post-NL. A lot of you are going to remember Gafuri because he twice made it to the finals of the Zwift Academy, but both times missed out on the final contract with Alpecin de Koning. Hats off to him though, because he persevered this year with the SWAT Club, an amateur team, who won the Italian national champs this year, and now he's been given a chance to prove himself at the very highest level. And I have no doubt at all he'll be absolutely determined to prove himself. He's a class rider and very methodical with it, and I'm really looking forward to tracking his progress next season and beyond. Luke Lamperti is leaving Soudal Quickstep and heading over to EF Education EasyPost, whilst Michael Leonard also heads there after a few years at Ineos. The team has also signed 19-year-old Matthias Schwarzbacher, their first ever Slovakian rider. Gleb Syriza has been promoted back to XDS Astana's World Tour team after a year in their development squad, whilst Pascal Ackermann has signed on the dotted line for Jayco Alula. Right, that is all for yet another week. I look forward to seeing you again next Monday. Bye for now.